Ah,
Yeah,
okay, found the button. So let's see, is my mic loud enough?
yeah.
Okay, excellent. Let's see, maybe I'll turn my level up a bit. Uh, oh, I have a thing for that over here. Okay, so is that it? There we,
Yep.
excellent.
So I would
Oh,
like
I
to
forgot, I have volume control on my amplifier. There we go.
that I actually would like to welcome Nelson Pass of both Pass Labs and First Watts. So this is episode number 7. So I always like to start off with like what got you in, kind of what got you into this, like kind of like this whole thing.
When I was very young, I liked to listen to hi-fi. It's very simple. My mother had a Magnavox stereo and she had a record collection, and I listened to it. And of course, this was at the beginning of the golden age of rock and roll. So I also had a transistor radio, AM, and later on an FM. And so I loved music, but at the same time, I like to play building things.
Yeah.
And so I was always building something. And it was only a short matter of time before I was building my own speakers. And then eventually, by the time I got, along in college and fell in with a group of people who were similarly interested in audio, I started building amplifiers as well. And I just kept doing it. And that goes back 50 years.
That I'm kind of new to this whole hi-fi thing. So I started off with one of those kind of like all-in-one turntables. But then there was always music in the house. So there was always music playing. So I eventually got this all-in-one turntable. Then eventually started to expand my components. And it's kind of like the same thing. I started to play with all these different parts to see how they work.
Well, there you have it. It's something fun to do.
Yeah.
But after I got to college, I
Yeah.
started hanging out with audiophiles. And in my second year, I had roommates in an apartment, and everybody had a hi-fi system. And we had JBLs and Utahs and let's see, I'm trying to think. Lots of the old time speakers. I'm trying to, you know what? I'm turning 71 and I can't remember everything. So, but the point was is that between 5 guys, there were five hi-fi systems, and we had them all stacked up on against a wall in the living room, and we played the same stuff through all of them at once. And people, some people thought that was pretty disgusting, but it was fun.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we did. Now, later on, after I became even more involved in that, I started actually getting involved in building speakers and selling them for a very small profit. And I ran across some people who were far more serious. One of them was a guy named Pete Wehrbeck, who lived in a house and was somewhat smarter and crazier than me. And he was designing amplifiers. He was building amplifiers from scratch. And that got me inspired. I got involved in doing some of that. In fact, I started out with some of his boards that he had made. And So we were doing that sort of stuff. And one of his roommates wanted to form a company building loudspeakers. And so we did that. Now we're really starting to get into the big time. But we actually made speakers and sold them to other, students on campus. Pete Wehrbeck, though, went on to I fell in with a small company that was I had just started up only recently before that, called ESS, and they were in Sacramento. There were some guys in a house, and they looked at him and went, "Wow, you design amplifiers? Okay, why don't you come out and come out and hang out for us?" And so he got a job there when they were actually at that point they were just starting to move out of the house, and they found themselves in a small industrial space. And ESS was electrostatic sound systems, and they were taking Jensen electrostatic panels, mating them up with KEF drivers in rather large electrostat systems. And I think their model of who it was they were wanted to be and were competing with was Infinity at that time, which was also doing electrostatic loudspeakers, large ones. So Pete went to work for them. Meanwhile, because I had kind of a dual job. I was getting a degree in physics, but I had a job in the physics department, and then 2 doors down from physics and 2 buildings down was the engineering department, and I had a job there also. And I had the keys to the anechoic chamber at the engineering building, and so I had a serious tool. And I went to visit the guys at ESS and said, I'm interested in designing some enclosures and boxes and building up speakers, and I have the keys to the anechoic chamber. They went, "Well, you look like a smart kid. How about we give you a job?" And so they did. And I went to work part-time at ESS. Actually, I worked nights and went to school by day. Very exciting time. And Pete was there. He was working on designing amplifier for them. And about a month after I started there and was working on stuff, they met Oscar Heil, who invented the Heil air motion transformer. He just kind of showed up out of nowhere, and he was looking for somebody to produce his tweeter. And they just went, "Oh," and embraced him with open arms. And so all of a sudden, it was a very exciting time because they decided to go full out in terms of getting these things built and out the door and sold and build the company. And they went out and raised a bunch of money from stockholders and banks and so on, and moved to a bigger building. And all of a sudden, I went from working for this sleepy little company that's got a small industrial space to one that had, I think, about, it was probably 20,000 square feet. It was huge, it was enormous. And they were hiring people like crazy. And I pretty much was in charge of, I designed crossovers, and I was involved in the testing of loudspeakers and circuits. Peter was still working on amplifiers, and he developed a nice power amplifier, which was kind of similar to kind of a takeoff on what Bob Carver was doing with his 400 watt per channel, except that in some ways it was, I think, a little more advanced circuitry wise. But of course, he looked at what Bob did and then said, "Well, this is how I can make it better." And so ESS was suddenly in the amplifier business as well. They were making Heil diaphragms, and it was a big thing. And it was a big splash, and it had terrific product, a huge growth for the company. So all of a sudden, it's a fairly big company with, I don't know, probably about then they had 40, 50 people. It really grew really fast from a little sleepy thing to a high budget operation. And I was part of my job was watching over the quality assurance of the Heil diaphragms and the Heil drivers. And so I built a small anechoic chamber, and I got set up with a lot of nice test equipment that was used to measure every diaphragm, every loudspeaker, and also was used for R&D to make improvements or to test refinements that they were playing with. And so I'd set all this equipment up. And as I say, I was still working nights. And then one evening, I'm working away, and a lady who folded diaphragms by day, in other words, she was making Heil diaphragms, she's hanging around after work. And it turned out actually that they were running 2 shifts at the time. So there was a day shift and in production, a night shift as well. And she was married to a guy on the night shift. And so she was stuck there because he had the car. So she's just sitting there hanging around, nothing better to do. I go, well, hey, you look like a smart kid. Come over here. Let me show you how to work all this equipment and stuff, and then you can test them. And I don't have to. So so she became in charge of testing the Heil diaphragms. That became her new career, and it was full time just on that. She went on to become head of quality control at ESS over the course of years. She was in charge of everything that had to do with the quality of the product. And she was a great person for that. Anyways, I married her eventually, and she is currently still my wife after all these years. I met her this year, I met her 50 years ago. And this year I married her 40 years ago. So I met her on the Heil production line at ESS. So there I was at ESS. I stayed there for 2 years, and then they'd had enough of me and said, okay, you're out of here. Because I was a pain in the ass, they just didn't recognize what value that was. So me and another guy, Rene Besnay, decided to start a new company, but we didn't want to get into loudspeakers. We already had enough of a taste of the loudspeaker industry to know that it's very tough to break into it and tough to compete. However, electronics, solid state electronics, were a really growing category at that point. And we decided that we were going to build amplifiers. And I had already built some amplifiers, and I wasn't too bad at it. And so we formed Threshold. After I left, we formed Threshold Corporation. I worked days as a service technician for Sun Stereo, managing the service shop and learning even more about amplifiers because I was fixing them while we developed the product that was released in 1975. It was called the 800A, which was a 150 watt per channel Class A amplifier. That was the first product, and we just did another one after that and another one after that. And we kept selling them, and the years went by. Finally, in 1987, we sold the company to a big corporation called Dynatech, and kind of just settled back and watched other people do most of the work. And I did that for a few years, and then I just was, it wasn't working out for me. So I left and formed Pass Labs in 1991. And I had Jill's my wife. Jill and I had purchased a house up in the mountains above in the Sierras in a place called Forest Hill, up above Auburn. Nice little mountain community. And I had, let's see, I had about 4,000 square feet of shop space and office space and so on that I built, and proceeded to start another company. That was Pass Labs. And that's what I've been doing ever since. 10 years ago, though, I kind of stepped back and I had some great, I still do have great business partners, people who are very experienced. Some of these people that I'm associated with now go all the way back to ESS, not just my wife, but the lady, well, first off, one of my best business partners, who's deceased now, Joe Samet, was a stockholder at ESS. And he later he joined Threshold. And then later on, we bought him out. But he had by then also hooked up with a lady who was at Threshold, who had been at ESS in accounting, and she was the accounting controller at Threshold. So after a while, though, they moved back east, and he went to work for Krell. Okay. And the years go by, and he left Krell and came back, and I offered him a chunk of Past Labs to come and join the company, because I had really missed him a lot. He was an incredible talent, and he did a lot for Krell. And he brought with him not only his wife, Barbara, who had been the accountant at all these places, uh, and became the controller at Past Labs, okay, because hey, she's a good accountant. And the other thing is that he also brought with him a very talented designer called, brain fart, just a moment, Desmond Harrington, who was an Irish digital engineer, but he'd been hired at Krell to put them into the business of making CD players and DACs. And this is, but on the side, he's a terrific industrial designer. So he was designing chassis and faceplates and stuff like that for Krell. And so he followed Joe, and all of a sudden we were all set up in Forest Hill, and we're doing that for some years, and eventually got too big to be around my house anymore, and we moved up into town. When Desmond joined Past Labs, that was the point at which our chassis and faceplates and stuff like that started looking really nice. And Krell, not so much anymore. So we did this for years. And like I say, after 10 years ago, I had built a house here at Sea Ranch. I live on the coast, and I'm at a distance from these people, except for, yet another person who has come along all these ways, which is Wayne Colburn, who designs the preamps at Past Labs. He continues to do that, but he also has moved out to Sea Ranch at the coast, and he's a neighbor of mine. And Desmond is moving to Ireland. We have a wonderful retirement program. We just keep paying you, and you keep working wherever you happen to be. So at this point, Joe and Barbara's daughter, Anastasia, who by chance was an accountant and who worked at Hewlett Packard and got tired of Hewlett Packard. Then she came over to Past Labs and began managing the accounting and managing all the money. And then, geez, she's so good, we made her president. And so it's a company full of people who've been around forever, for very long years, company after company. And it's great. It's an absolutely terrific crew. And so I have, life is really good. I just do R&D. All day long, I play with circuits that interest me, and whatever looks good or fulfills a need, I find some way of getting it out there into the marketplace, whether it's through Past Labs, which is the big hardware, the big expensive hardware, or First Watt, which is somewhat less expensive and less power and less big, but has its own little charms. And then actually, I also spend a lot of time doing stuff for DIY. And so I can be reliably found in the pages of DIYaudio.com, where I have all my little side projects and whatever it is I want to do, that as long as it doesn't create trouble for the other things that we're doing here, it's great. And that's my life. And so I'm today, there was an eagle perched outside of our house. That's how great this place is. I'm right on the ocean. And so I'm surrounded by all sorts of natural environment and wildlife. And we have 2 horses, and we feed foxes and raccoons and birds. The birds, we have ravens and buzzards and Tweety birds and a large variety. The neighbor that I have here, when we moved out full time finally, he said, well, if you're not a bird watcher already, you will be. And he's absolutely correct. We spend our time watching the birds out on our deck, and I have this just tremendous environment that I get to enjoy. And then I go back into my shop and cobble together circuits and play with them. That's my life. That's the last 50 years. pretty much.
Uh, So whenever it's for past labs or for SWAT, do you ever, when designing a product, do you have like a certain goal in mind of it being like a certain sound quality or like a certain design? Or is it more open to new ideas?
Well, we're pretty open to new ideas, but we also have become kind of set in terms of knowing what it is that we like. You understand that this is a fairly large industry, actually. You know, there's a worldwide, there's a fairly large market which for high-end amps, which approaches maybe $1 billion. So it's not small, it's big. And if you have 1% of the sales in this marketplace, you're doing really well. You're making money. You're doing okay. And so that gives us a lot of freedom, though, because we don't have to appeal to most people. We only really have to satisfy ourselves and then have a product that is good enough that at least 1% of the people out there would want it over something else. We do have, well, there's a difference too between what the companies do. Actually, there's 3 companies, because the third company is Passworks, which I use strictly for DIY to break it out separately. Once again, the idea is to do what you want, but not cause trouble. So Pass Labs is a pretty high power stuff for the last, since about, oh, let's see, long time now, since about 95. So I guess that would be about 27 years. For the last 27 years, we have been selling a product which is mostly Class A and some Class A/B amplifiers that are referred to, the circuitry is referred to as supersymmetric. And we got a patent on that. And there's a technical story behind it, but mostly it's just a really cool way of getting low distortion and high power with simple circuits. And I love simple circuits. There's a bunch of reasons why. One is that the simplicity in a circuit, all of the things being equal, sounds better. The complicated circuits just don't appeal to me sonically. The other thing is that they're easier to make. There's fewer parts. They might be more expensive parts, but they're still easier to make. And also they, you know, if you're really careful, you can make them very reliable too, because again, they're simple. And if they do break, they're easy to fix. So when you look at what we do for all the products, we try to make it as simple as possible, and reliability is a big chunk of that. But we have an emphasis also on more on the quality of the sound, the characteristics of the sound, than just the raw specs. I like to get good specs, but I also like to have a certain quality, shall we say, a personality to the sound of a product. And if that means something that deviates a bit from the perfection in specs, then that's okay with me. I look to the fact that a lot of people, a good chunk of the public using in high-end audio, are still in love with tubes, which are far from perfect from a measurement standpoint, but they have characteristics that have an appeal subjectively. Now, after I started First Watt, which was again, that was my kitchen table company, it was just me, and it was like I could build anything I want. I don't have to care. I don't even have to make money. It doesn't matter, right? I'm doing what I want to do. At that time, well, the reason that you have to do that, though, or at least I had chose to do it that way, was Pass Labs was doing very well with the products that it had. And what I wanted to do was something which was going to be kind of different than that. But if you have one company trying to be 2 personalities to its customer base, you have nothing but trouble. It creates issues. And also, when you become successful marketing products and you become known for those particular kind of products, it's kind of a straitjacket, because you are known for having a particular kind of product with a particular kind of sound, with a particular kind of look, and so on. And if that's successful, there's a lot of forces influencing you to stay on that course and not to go off and do something strange. And yet I wanted to do some strange stuff. So First Watt was perfect for me. It was my little garage company. After Past Labs moved into a bigger facility, I had that garage space, and that I had 4,000 feet of shop space left over. And so I said, well, I'm going to do something with this. And so I formed First Watt. The idea was I can build anything I want, and I don't have to worry about whether anybody likes it or not. It turned out that they did like it. It turned out that, it too started forming its own culture in terms of what kind of amplifier it was and what kind of sound it presented. And it was different, but having been segregated out, it wasn't such a problem. Also, I limited it to low power. In other words, First Watt amplifiers, they really were trying to be the best at being the first watt. And so they didn't go beyond about 20, 25 watts on any of these amplifiers. And meanwhile, at Past Labs, we didn't have any amplifiers that went lower than that. And so it helped segregate these things out. And again, just kind of kept everybody from getting confused. So Past Labs, going back to the sound though, because that's the important thing. The emphasis is on the quality of sound. What does it do? If you look at a lot of the amplifiers that are popular, but which don't spec all that well, and tubes are a fine example of that, you find that they have, going back to that simplicity thing, they have a simple characteristic in those distortions that it have. You have, when you measure distortion, typically what they do is they judge it by the harmonic content of a sine wave. You put a sine wave in and you get that back out amplified, but also some new components of distortion, which form harmonics of that original frequency. So there's the second harmonic, the third harmonic, and so on. It's quite clear that if you're going to have distortion, you want them down in those first couple of harmonics. You don't want fifth harmonic. You don't want all of this high order stuff. If you look at the distortion waveforms on a scope, you can see this stuff. You can see a second harmonic as its own pure second harmonic sine wave, and same kind of thing with the third. But as you get into those higher harmonics, you start seeing all sorts of itchy and scratchy things showing up in the waveform. It's not hard to discern that those are things which are non-musical. And the question here is, what does second harmonic or third harmonic bring to the table if you're going to allow some of it in? Well, taking my cue from tubes, I began looking at static induction transistors, which are a form of FET, which is a field effect transistor. And it's a different kind of FET than most of the ones that everybody's familiar with, because if you use an analogy against tubes, there are two basic kinds of tubes. There's the triode, which is a 3-pin device, and which has a particular characteristic, and you have a pentode or tetrode, which is basically a 4-pin device, and they have a different character. And the difference is what they refer to as the plate impedance of the two parts, which give them a different curve. So the triode has got a curve where the gain of the device, which is the key thing. If you have a distortionless device, the gain of the device is always constant. It's the same value under all circumstances. In FETs and tubes, though, as the current goes up, generally the gain goes up. And if it is, if it's a triode, not only does the gain go up with the amount of current, but it also goes up a lot with the amount of voltage across the tube. So it's a double hit. It gives the two types of parts a different sound. If you listen to the triode sound, and especially since it's easy to play with, you can actually tweak these. With a knob, you can turn them into different beasts. You find some of the characteristics that are very remarkable, and also it's not difficult to identify which ones appeal to tube guys and why. And it's not only necessarily the same thing, but there are some simply adjusted aspects to tubes that give rise to tube sound, even if you take the transformers out of there and whatever it is that they're doing. So it turns out, though, that especially in solid state, especially with FETs, you can get some of these phenomena by doing some of the similar sorts of adjustments, because there are analogies between these parts. Normal FETs, like MOSFETs and most JFETs, they act like pentodes. They don't have a heater, and and so on, but they look a lot like pentodes. And but there's a type of FET called a static induction transistor. In fact, it was a very, very early design, which is like a triode. And if you get those parts, you have a lot of fun being able to emulate the sound of triodes, but often at really high power levels and very efficiently. You don't have a heater, and you don't have all sorts of things, and you don't need a transformer. So all of a sudden, you've got something that looks and sounds like a triode, but it has lots of advantages in terms of just raw convenience. You don't have to power a heater, and you don't have to operate it at 400 or 500 volts. It'll operate at the same voltages that the speaker wants to see. So all of a sudden, it's very convenient. So I had a chance to get a hold of some of these about 11 years ago or so. There was an outfit called Semi-South that was pioneering silicon carbide transistors. They were the result of a government research triangle that was in the southeast portion of the United States. And Semi-South was in Mississippi. They were building a silicon carbide JFETs, power JFETs that were useful for all sorts of things, mostly in those days, military things. And the Air Force was really interested in these in particular, especially the notion of an SIT. This is called an SIT is a static induction transistor. Well, it's a FET, okay, but it's a particular kind. But the Air Force had gone to Semi-South and had a bunch of SITs made out of silicon carbide, because SITs are very, very fast. They're good for microwave work. And out of silicon carbide, they can be run up at horrendously high temperatures without breaking. We used to joke, I said, should put a window in the transistor so you can see it glowing, because it'll be running that hot. But you can strap it to a jet engine, or you can park it on Venus. It won't break. So I bought some of those, and I put them in my little first watts amplifiers. And whoa, that was a lot of fun. And the guys at Semi-South, who were just a little company, really, the head of development there was talking to me on the phone. He says, say, would you be interested in some SITs, not just regular transistors? And I said, what's that? So he explains it to me, and he goes, oh, well, that's really interesting. He goes, well, I can't send you any because the Air Force came and scooped them all up. They had a run made as a prototype, but I can make you more. And so here I am. When it was all over, it was like 6 digits later. I had a big box of silicon carbide SITs, and I did an amplifier called the SIT-1. And the only gain in the amplifier, the only active component, was the SIT itself. Everything else in there was just a resistor or just a capacitor and so on. And it was like the simplest circuit I ever made. But it was spectacular. Oh, it had the character, though. Go ahead.
It's
So
That-
that
yeah,
was fun.
yeah,
Well, let me finish this story and then we can talk about what you want to talk about.
yeah.
So the point was on this is I had this single device, an SIT in a gain stage, and it was the whole amplifier by itself. And you could dial it depending on how much voltage and current you set it at, you got a slightly different characteristic, but it acted like a triode. And so I built an amplifier and I put a knob on the front so that you could turn that characteristic this way or that way. And if you turn the knob to, I had a meter showing you where you were at too. If you turn the knob to the left, it generated a second harmonic, but it turned out that that harmonic was its timing relationship to the fundamental sine wave was inverted. So you call it, I call it a negative phase second harmonic because the distortion wave went negative every time there was a peak, whether it was positive or negative. And positive would be the opposite. So I had a knob, and if you turned it to the center of the position, the second harmonic was nulled, and all you had left was some third harmonic. And if you turned the knob higher than that, then you got second harmonic back, but now it was a positive phase second harmonic. And I said, how interesting. So I knew all sorts of people who were good ears. And I sent amplifiers off to one of my business partners, the guy who had gone to Krell and come back, Joe Sammet, best ears on the planet. He was really terrific. But I didn't want just him because I wanted to really find out what do people like. So they could play with the knob, and all I wanted them to do was tell me what they heard and where they liked the knob. That is to say, the position on the meter. Well, most of them came back and said, I like it just like this. And that setting was a negative phase second harmonic. Now, not everybody, okay, but that's still mostly it. Well, later I went back to, at Absolute Sound, not Absolute Sound, at Stereophile, John Atkinson does tests on amplifiers. And one of the things he does that I really like is that he shows the distortion waveform of the product. In other words, here's a picture of the sine wave, but below it is a picture of the distortion relative, occurring at the same time, but with that main sine wave removed by a distortion analyzer, just leaving just the distortion. And what I noticed is that some of the really popular tube preamps and amps had negative phase second harmonic. That was the key thing linking that sound to the tubes. And of course, it was a tube-like device that was creating them. So after that, I said, well, I'm really onto something here. And we did more research. What it came out to is what a lot of people experience, and not everybody, but a lot. Negative phase second harmonic, even though it is a special effect. You do it in small doses, not a lot. Expands your perception of the depth of field of an audio presentation. In other words, when you listen, you got a sound stage, negative phase second harmonic tends to deepen the sound stage and tends to give you some placement, little bits of perceived placement of instruments and such. Again, it's an illusion, but a lot of people love that illusion. If you go positive phase, interestingly, the whole thing becomes a little more intimate and in your face. And some people like that too. In fact, actually, if you had a knob on there, you could play it either way. It wasn't a problem. The other thing that I discovered too, and I was continued to research this stuff, it was the third harmonic, that which was remained when you null out the second harmonic in these circuits. What will be left, it will get turned into a third harmonic of a lesser value. Is that third harmonic comes in two phases also. One is what we call a compressive character, where as the amplitude of a wave goes higher and higher, it starts compressing, it starts running out of gas a little bit, and sort of rounds it off. There's the expansive characteristic, which is the opposite of that, which is, by the way, not easy to come by. It's been done, but it eventually falls apart at very high levels. But while it's there, you're actually getting what it might be conceived of as an expanded dynamic sense to this. So the paradox, however, and I have no reason why this might be, I have no, and not the slightest theory, is that the compressive one actually gets perceived as going louder by people. And so actually they listen to that, they hear it a lot that way. And it has, in fact, people do use compression to make things louder. They do it, that's one of the complaints about the kind of sound that, is set out for the radio and for, music in the environments. So these are all these interesting things. Well, you can perform these tricks with simple circuits. And again, all you really have to do is appeal to a minority segment of the audiophile group. And there are lots of people who like that. There's other people who go, I want it completely accurate. I want no distortion whatsoever. And I go, that's fine. I actually have product over here, more expensive at Past Labs, where it's got really great numbers. And if you want that, no problem. At First Watt, yeah, we got our own little sandbox here, but we're having fun.
Yeah. I'm kind of measurements. I really don't follow that much. For me personally, it's whatever sounds good.
Sure.
But
well,
I know everyone's a little bit different.
Everybody's a lot different. But I believe in both things.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to achieve good sound. I don't, but I bet the measurements are very valuable to me because they are part of that. If I can match up particular qualities of sound against other qualities that I'm measuring, then I can more easily duplicate that effect if I want that quality of sound. So I pay very close attention to measurements. I work with measurements all the time, but I don't. But they're not the master. Here I am. They are the slaves.
So one thing that really I found interesting is that over at First Watt, there is always a limited run of products. Kind of why is that?
Well, the reason I created First Watt in the first place is I wanted to try lots of different things. I want to play. I wish to be creative, and so I try to get out of the scenario where you sell a product for as long as anybody will buy it. It's just easier for me to get enough of them out there and then eventually and just move on so because I like your room has to be made for new product for me because I'm developing new product all the time. If I come across something really great, well, maybe I'll send it up to Past Labs. You never know what in fact stuff does go up to Past Labs all the time, but I still have I don't want to keep making the same amplifier all the time. It used to be just me, and but a few years ago, I transferred production over to Past Labs. Now, it's not like we don't continually make product. I came out with an amplifier called the J2, and I had intended only to build 100 of them, just like I do. But everybody wanted it, and the dealers go, "You can't let that go. What am I going to do? I'm not going to piss off my customers." So. Past Labs continues to make J2s to this day, and so but Past Labs is good at doing stuff over long hauls. I mean, the original amplifiers, the original super symmetry amplifiers, the X amplifiers, the X150, X1, it goes all the way back to 95, and that's, like I say, 27 years. Well, we're on our third generation of X and XA amplifiers, and all we've done is stick a 0.5 and then a 0.8, and things like, but some of these products, the product designations, you typically have a more than 10-year lifespan. And we usually let something like 8 to 12 years go by, and then here's new product or a new new version of that product, which is what we have done. So if people want continuity, you can always get that pretty much from past labs. First what? Not so much. I like to move on. It's an outlet of creativity for me.
One of the things that I like about first watt is that the amount of watts isn't too crazy.
No, 25 watts is the limit.
Yeah.
And 5 watts is the bottom end.
Yeah. Just what like part of the setup that I have a product that only has 15 watts, but I pair them with the some clips speakers.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first off, people think they need a lot more power than they really do. I have in my system here, I have a scope, and I have a setting on the scope. I call it the 1 watt window. And that is, if the waveform that you see coming out of an amplifier, driving speaker, if it stays inside this window, then a 1 watt amplifier can do it. Okay. Well, people are surprised because they'll be listening to loud music and it still hasn't left that screen. It's still inside the 1 watt window. And so now I run efficient speakers here as a rule. And so, but yeah, but mostly people are very surprised, even when you talk about a 95 dB sensitive speaker, which I've got several examples. 1 watt's loud. If I didn't live out in the wilds of the coast, then I'd have people banging on the wall, to turn it down with 1 watt. So, and clips are right into that category.
Yeah. Yeah.
They play plenty loud. Well, in the 50s, Paul Klipsch famously said, "What this country needs is a good 5 watt amplifier." That hasn't really changed, I don't think.
Yeah. I saw a video that was done actually by it was it was done by Steve Guttenberg,
Oh yeah, I know Steve real well. He's great.
and it's one of the bigger clips that he's done. He only used like an amp that was like 2 watts.
Oh yeah, sure. And he probably got complaints. Well, I mean, what are we trying to do? I don't actually, most of the time I don't care for loud music. Sometimes upstairs in a different system, we will put on, Pink Floyd. and I have speakers that'll play really loud. They're not real efficient, but I've got plenty of juice, and deep bottom end. So every once in a while, it's fun to have a little hearing damage. But most of the time, I listen at just really normal levels.
Usually, when I listen, it's usually in like the afternoon, evening, so it's not like too loud. So I always don't crank the volume that loud. But these clips I have like do sound good even at low volume or high volume.
Yeah. Well, they're excellent speakers, and the designs of the clips, the classics are just my favorites. The Cornwalls and the La Scalas are my idea of a really good time.
I have a pair of it's the Heresy,
Uh-huh.
but the ones I have are from like the mid 80s,
Yes.
and they still sound like, even all these decades later, still sound amazing.
Well, and I was around when they came out. I had a neighbor who had a pair. No, and the thing is that, as my deceased business partner would say, it's not dialysis, it's entertainment. We're here to have fun. We're here to enjoy ourselves. And so, I'm quite certain that Paul Klipsch saw it in precisely the same way. And he was an entertainer all by himself, a real character.
So uh, it was kind of to what you just mentioned about the setup. So when you listen to music, what is kind of like the format, like the source?
Oh, actually, in my okay, upstairs it's all vinyl. I just love vinyl, and but that's for me to have fun with. When I'm down here, I'm working,
Yeah.
and so what I need is I actually what I do is I rip segments of recordings which have interesting things that I want to hear. And the idea in my book is to uh, I have what I refer to as shortcuts. I edit the cut down. It fades. It either starts up or it fades in, and then it fades out after a period of time. And so you get a minute or 2 minutes of a performance, so that you can listen to the amplifier, and you can go through cuts one after another. Okay, and they'll just play right through. You don't have to touch anything, but they come in and then they fade out gently, and then it's the next one, and it's all material that is good at resolving the differences between the amplifiers. Or if I'm playing with speakers, which I sometimes do, that also. So they're also real good if you're going to shows, like for instance, the Burning Amp Festival. They make great demos. You can't play Symphony Fantastique for guys who are coming in and out of a room to hear something, because it's too long. And not only that, but it may not be what they like. But if the stuff is kept down to a minute or two of some particular kind of music, they'll hang around long enough for that, and then they can hear something else, and then they can hear something else. So it's a crowd pleaser when you're at a show, and you don't have to tend the equipment. You can just set it up on a disc, or you could burn it to a CD and just let it run. So you can actually leave the room and the system still runs fine, and there's no silence. So but I use that consistently for when I'm adjusting an amplifier, or when I'm playing with something different. I have something which is very, very familiar, and also can be consistently reproduced over and over again. And so down here, that's the criteria for everything is how well does it resolve the differences in amplifiers? That's actually what I spend time looking at. And sometimes you can't tell. I don't have the best ears on the planet, but at least I can catch it when there's something wrong. And I have lots of other people who are happy to give me their opinions as well, and very good about listening to them.
That
Now, how did you get doing this? What's your story?
Well, just mainly there was always music in the house, and from what I remember, like when I was growing up, we had it was like a decent setup that played as CDs, so we would always play music through that. But this whole hi-fi thing didn't start until probably 3 or 4 years ago, till when I was a bit more curious to see what was out there. So I started to get into vinyl and started to explore all these different options to seeing what amplifiers did what, and what speakers did like with what speakers did. So I guess it was kind of like a curiosity. But more recently, I got a receiver from the 70s.
Oh, which one?
It's a Pioneer SX450.
Oh, yes. When I was doing a year worth of service, I was fixing Pioneers. They hardly ever broke, but they were so beautiful inside.
And so when I got that used, it definitely there's some wear and tear, just like scratches, but when I opened it up inside, it was extremely dusty. So I took like a compressed air can and cleaned out the whole thing and got it working. And then I hooked up some a 14 gauge speaker wire to my speakers and got that running.
So you're still running the Pioneer?
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Like I said, they were lovely. And I loved it, and I loved their schematics also. You could see how nicely they thought about circuits when you see the schematics that they developed for them. And there was some very advanced stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there was Sony also. I mean, there were and Technics and so on. But I always liked the internal workings and layout of the Pioneers.
Yeah. It definitely is like a favorite piece in my setup, just because it definitely was before the age of when things started to become more of a digital processing.
Yep.
That it was like at the kind of like the tail end of like the analog. It was made between like 77 and 79.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What was I doing in 77? Well, that's when I was fixing receivers in the back of Sun Stereo. Actually, I had other guys fixing them too, but if a Macintosh came in or if a Pioneer came in, they were mine to play with. And if a Nico came in, it was mine also, because they didn't actually break. They just had circuit breakers that would trip. And so you could just go click, here you go, here's your amplifier. I fixed it for you. No charge.
But this is just like a kind of like a side hobby, or kind of like a side thing I'm doing. But it's definitely one thing that I do enjoy.
You have a smile on your face. I can tell.
Yeah.
Well, me too. I love what I do. So how's your time? Are they going to cut us off here?
We're actually still good.
Oh,
The,
do you
there's
have any other questions?
um the the so what are kind of like some of the things that you enjoy about making products, no matter like kind of like what product it is?
Well, I like speakers and I like amplifiers.
Yeah.
Those are the two things I basically deal with. I mean, yeah, preamp to me is just an amplifier anyways, but and crossover networks and equalizers, those are the things that I play with. I don't play with digital. I just use it. It's past me. I've got one of my business partners. He plays with digital. He's a genius at that. And me, I just like putting little individual transistors together and so on, and making simple stuff that works. So I don't know. I like to keep busy. It's what I do. It's fun to be creative. It makes money. I can't complain about that. But at this late date, the business seems to run itself just fine without anything I have to particularly do. So this is what I do. I have a wife who loves horses. What does she do? She's out there taking care of horses and riding them around. And I mean, people find the thing that they love and then they just do it. That's here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of like what? So with Class A, kind of like what makes it, kind of like what draw you to that for the amps?
Well, it goes back to simple. if you want to build a high quality amplifier, a Class A operation is the simplest way to get quality. It's not the cheapest way, but if you want, if you're trying to get really good performance, whether even if it's low distortion or if you favor a particular kind of distortion, Class A is the way that you can easily achieve that. And like I say, it burns up more energy than other ways. But I have a roof full of solar panels, so I don't feel bad. That's not, I have an electric car too. I don't feel bad at all. So, but I started out in my commercial end of my career with the 800A at threshold was a Class A amplifier that was more efficient, whereas the tradition then is that a Class A amplifier idled at twice the rating of its output. So if it was a 100-watt amplifier, it idled at 200 watts. Okay, that's traditional Class A. I managed to bend the curves on the output stage a bit to turn it into only idled at 100 watts. Well, it was still idled at 100 watts. If you go back to say looking at the Pioneer, or what was being done by Bob Carver and other guys like that, they had stuff that was idling at 10 watts. They weren't wasting too much juice if you weren't actually using it. But to get the performance with that kind of approach, you have to have more complicated circuitry. You find that the harmonic structure that I was talking about, second harmonic being lovely and third, and then a higher order harmonics being less lovely, in fact, irritating at some point. If you're saving energy in, say, a Class A in an output stage of an amplifier, you'll find that you are dealing in higher order harmonics, much more so than those low order harmonics that aren't so annoying. So you got a lot, you have an upside and a downside. The downside is strictly the efficiency. Now, that one other reason why First Watt built small amplifiers, like low power amplifiers. Well, Class A, but it doesn't waste so much energy. It's not like, there's lots of other appliances that you've got that are going to draw more. It's not going to be the elephant on the dance floor. But that's the appeal. It's just that it gives a sweeter sound. But it does so, also a much simpler circuit. And well, also I just, if you're going to do something, well, Class A, that's the one, isn't it? They named it right. Whereas I say Class D, well, I don't know, the name says something. Now, I tease Class D. I think it's a miracle. Well, first off, I think it's a miracle that it works at all. But also, there's some guys out there like Bruno Pazzis at Hypex, doing incredible work, getting great performance out of Class D amplifiers. It's not really my cup of tea, but I fully appreciate what they've achieved. I admire all sorts of things that you'd never catch me doing either.
I'm not sure what type of receiver this Pioneer is, but it definitely has a kind of like a warmer, laid back sound that I enjoy, but I'm not sure how it compares to a Class A,
well, your Pioneer would be a Class AB.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it would run at Class A at really quite low levels. If you're just sitting there and listening to a fraction of a watt, you're probably still in Class A with the Pioneer. That said, too, it's a fact that Pioneer threw a little extra bias current on that product than some of the competition. Now, the other fine example, too, of that era were the Sony VFETs. I was talking about SITs. Well, the VFETs are the same thing. And so here I am at this late date going, oh, SITs/VFETs, they are it. Well, these guys knew this in the 70s. And they were, in fact, the VFETs were developed by Nishizawa in Japan, like 1969 or so. So maybe earlier, I'm not sure. The guy was a total genius, a Japanese treasure. Unfortunately, the market didn't properly appreciate what the VFETs could do back then, and they were expensive to make. So that was the other downside to them.
Yeah.
Anyways, you'd be happy with your Pioneer. It's a
Yeah.
wonderful piece.
Yeah. So I actually just got a notification that there's 10 minutes left.
Oh, I can talk for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Just keep track so that we can say goodbye instead of just getting cut off.
Yeah.
And you, of course, can edit this
Yeah.
and take out any silliness that you like.
Yeah. Do you ever listen to music in more of like a casual?
24/7.
Yeah.
I'm always surrounded by music. I'm not playing any right now, but it's ready to go. And I listen to a lot of lounge. I listen to a lot of jazz, a little bit of classical music, soundtracks, rock and roll. But I arrange what I like so that it just plays in rotation. And I've got, I don't know, maybe 4,000 CDs worth of that I bought. I mean, physical CDs that I bought, in boxes. And I just ripped them onto the computers, and I, sort out the stuff I like versus not, and let it just play. And so I'm always, except when I go to bed at night, I'm surrounded by music.
Yeah. Whenever I listen to music through this setup, it's primarily vinyl, but I also do listen to CDs. But a majority of my collection is vinyl. So some records I have are like a Sinatra.
Yes.
And then like it varies. So it goes from like jazz, and then I'll be listening to like rock or like soundtracks. Like it varies.
Well, I particularly like, Sinatra, Nelson Riddle is one of my favorites, is the guy in the background who's one of my favorites. And so almost anything that he produced and or participated in are things I've always appreciated. Of course, he's not the only one, and I like soundtracks, which I had moved away back down to LA eventually, but the neighbor who talked about the birds, he was a composer for movies and television. His argument was soundtracks are the classical music of the 20th century. And I go, well, I was going to say that. That's what I think. And so I have a pretty decent soundtrack collection. And I, of course, have my favorite composers.
So I think that wraps up the whole thing.
Okay.
So that's all the questions that I have.
Golly.
But I actually enjoyed being able to learn more about this, like kind of what goes into stuff like this.
Well, it's not hard.
Yeah.
It's fun, actually. I have, if you want to follow up on some of the technical things and other stuff, at firstwatt.com, they have an article section with every article I ever wrote. And there's probably about, 30 of them or so. Most of them are they tend toward DIY stuff, but I always try to work some philosophy and educational information in as part of that. So that's always something that if you want to go chase some of those things, you can catch them there.
I'll actually look at all those things and get more of kind of what goes into stuff like this.
Well, the main thing is to have fun.
Yeah.
Life's too short for anything else.
Yeah. So yeah, that wraps up the whole conversation. I've definitely had a fun time.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah. I'm not sure how you want to end this.
You can just sign off.
Yeah.
Take care. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.